Imagine an entire kingdom ruled by a man who could not tell the difference between a chicken and a dove. Imagine a throne occupied by someone who spent more time playing childish games than governing a nation. And yet, every command he gave shaped the fate of thousands. Wars were started, treasures wasted, and lives shattered, all because a crown was placed on the wrong head. As you lie down tonight, feeling the weight of your day slip away, picture this. What if tomorrow, the destiny of your own life depended on the whims of such a ruler? Someone fragile, foolish, or lost in delusion, yet obeyed by armies and feared by nobles. Imagine knowing that your safety, your family's well-being, even the bread on your table, rested in the hands of a man who might believe himself made of glass, or who gambled away half a kingdom on a reckless whim. Tonight, we will journey together into this strange and often absurd world of medieval thrones, a world where stupidity wore a crown of gold and folly held the scepter of power. You will hear of kings whose weakness cost their people dearly, whose madness shaped the course of nations, and whose names are remembered not for glory, but for failure. And yet, there is a deeper story here, because behind every disastrous ruler lies a lesson for us centuries later. A reminder that wisdom, not birthright, is what makes a leader, and that history, in its quiet way, always demands a price for arrogance and ignorance. So, close your eyes now, and let yourself drift back into an age where the flicker of a torch lit the halls of power, where knights whispered about their king in the dark, and where royal folly could doom an entire land. The journey begins. The world you are about to enter is not your own. The hum of traffic, the glow of screens, the soft comfort of modern life, all of that fades. What rises in its place is the weight of stone walls, the sharp bite of cold air, and the silence of a night ruled by flickering torches. Breathe in, slowly, and let the sense of another time reach you. The bitter smoke of resin-soaked torches burns faintly in the corridors of a castle, clinging to rough stone. Outside, the air is heavy with damp earth and the musky odor of wet fur, hounds shaking off the rain as guards tug at their cloaks. From far below, drifting faintly through narrow windows, comes the warm sweetness of fresh bread, baking in village ovens. It mixes with the sharper tang of wood smoke curling from low, thatched chimneys. Now listen. The sounds of the past surround you. Horses strike their iron-shod hooves against uneven cobblestones, the echoes ringing through narrow streets. The jangle of armor follows, a metallic rhythm of breastplates and chainmail shifting with every step. Somewhere in the fog, bells begin to toll. Slow, heavy, they carry across the damp morning air, announcing prayers, or danger, or simply the endless marking of time. And between those sounds, whispers, the hushed tones of guards speaking about their sovereign, voices lowered as if the night itself might listen. Run your hand, in your imagination, along the walls around you. The stones are cold and unyielding, slick with age. Centuries of touch have worn them smooth in some places, yet jagged in others. A velvet curtain drapes nearby, its surface coarse and stiff compared to the soft warmth of your bed. And above all, feel the weight of the crown. Not yours, but his. Heavy, almost crushing, resting on a head unprepared for its burden. Imagine how the metal pinches the skin, how the gems press down like a reminder that glory and torment are bound together. The light in this world is fragile, not the constant hum of electricity, but the unsteady glow of flame. Candles drip wax onto tarnished brass holders, trembling at the faintest draught. In great halls, torches flare, throwing restless shadows across tapestries and banners. A fire crackles in the main hearth, sparks rising toward blackened beams. And outside, the night holds its own glow, the pale shimmer of the moon, caught in the mist that clings to castle walls and village paths. Close your eyes now, and picture yourself not in the bed where you lie, but upon straw spread unevenly on the floor of a peasant's hut. The straw rustles under your weight, pricking lightly against your skin, carrying with it the earthy scent of the stable from which it was gathered. A rough wool blanket scratches across your arms. Near the wall, a clay stove breathes out faint warmth, though the air still bites with chill. Listen closely. Beyond the walls of this hut, the world is alive. The wind moans as it curls around wooden beams. Dogs bark sharply and then fall silent, as though sensing something unseen. And further still, there are shouts, the voices of soldiers carrying out the orders of their strange, unpredictable king. Some laugh bitterly, others curse under their breath, yet all obey. For in this time, the word of the king, wise or foolish, just or insane, was law. Breathe deeply, letting the cold damp of this world settle into your lungs. Feel how different it is. This is not a land of comfort or certainty. It is a land where fear and obedience shape the night, where the folly of one man can ripple through every hut, every hearth, every heart. And now, let the line blur between your time and theirs, between your room and this hut, between your soft mattress and the prickling straw. Let yourself drift, slowly, gently, into the rhythm of this forgotten world. The bells fade, the fire settles, and the night grows still. The story awaits. The boy king breathes shallowly. Candlelight trembles along the carved canopy above his bed, gilded leaves quivering like small, frightened birds. Servants move on felted slippers, whispering the way one whispers near a sickbed or a sacred relic. His name is Charles, and from his first cry, the world has called him king. From his first steps, the world has also called him bewitched. He does not know how to carry the silence that follows him into every chamber. He only knows how heavy everything feels. The wool of his robe, the velvet of his chair, the long gold rosary that drags against his chest like a chain. He knows the ache behind his eyes, the fatigue that settles after even a short morning of audience, the pity in the faces of men who must pretend not to see his trembling. He senses the pity most of all. It stings worse than mockery. When they bring him papers to sign, petitions, taxes, commands, he studies the careful letters, as if they were a secret code he might someday understand. The ministers nudge his hand. The quill scratches. Another decree leaves the room. Outside the palace, men live or die by the shape of his wavering signature. He wants to ask the clerks to wait, to explain, to teach him to see what they see. But pain clogs his throat, and exhaustion presses the crown down like a millstone. At night, he wakes to the sound of prayers echoing through the chapel. They pray for an heir, for strength, for a miracle. He prays too, in his slow, halting way. "Teach my bones to hold me up," he whispers. "Teach my blood to run the way a king's blood must." He imagines the map of his empire, coasts and mountains and cities he will never ride through. He imagines the sea routes and the ships and the chests of silver that come from horizons he cannot picture without growing dizzy. These treasures belong to him, they say. He cannot lift them. He can barely lift a cup. There are cures, they insist, broths and baths, relics, pilgrimages that he does not take. There are rumors that travel faster than couriers about his body, his mind, his chances. He feels each rumor enter the room like a draft, cooling the flame of his spirit till it gutters. The queen smiles bravely. The courtiers bow deeper. And still, the air carries a question it is not polite to say aloud. If the crown rests on a skull that aches, if the scepter is clenched by a hand that shakes, who rules? Some nights, when the palace sleeps, he asks a trusted friar to open a shutter. Cool air touches his face. Beyond the lattice, Madrid is a soft arrangement of roofs and chimneys. A dog barks. A woman sings to a child. Somewhere a cart rattles over stones. Entire worlds of ordinary life proceed without him, not unkindly, simply as rivers go on flowing while a broken branch snags on the bank. He envies the simple alignment of need and effort in those houses. Bread kneaded, wood split, water hauled. He has never had to do any of these things. He wishes he could. The friar tells him stories of patient kings, of saintly ones, of rulers who learned late, who grew into wisdom as a tree grows into its rings. Charles listens, eyes half closed. He wants to believe he has time, that wisdom is a season the body eventually knows. But the ministers grow sharper, the shadows longer, the talk of succession more brittle, more urgent, a frost that kills what is tender and unresolved. One morning, a child peeks around a door. Small, curious, the son of a guard. The boy stares at the crown on a cushion, his eyes widen as if in pain. Charles raises a hand, and the boy steps closer, not afraid. "Is it heavy?" the child asks. Charles nearly laughs. "Yes," he says softly. "Yes, it is." The boy nods, as if this is the most ordinary truth in the world, and the king feels, for a fleeting moment, less alone. He will be remembered for what he could not do, for the lines he could not draw, the airs he could not produce, the vigor he could not summon. But inside the gilded rooms, behind the stiff brocade and the watchful saints, there was also a human ache, the longing to stand straight, to think clearly, to be enough for the name carved into his seals. He falls asleep to the roll of prayers and the faint city noises, understanding at last that sometimes a crown is not an emblem. It is a confession. It tells the world exactly where a body ends and a burden begins. John of England, the man who counted and lost. He does not like to be touched. John, called Lackland, prefers the company of ledgers. Numbers never lie to him the way men do. He loves the crisp snap of parchment, the precise columns of rent, toll, and fine, the neat arithmetic of control. If power can be locked in a coffer, tallied in lines of ink, then power is safe. If loyalty can be itemized, name, title, amount due, then betrayal has fewer places to hide. Yet the more he counts, the more that slips away. Normandy fades like chalk and rain. Barons simmer like coals under ash. Rumors collect like brackish water in a ditch, slow, sour, mosquito thick. John's mind buzzes with their sting. He signs writs in a fury, presses seals into wax so hard the imprints crack. He calls councils, dismisses councils, calls them again. He overpays a captain. He underpays a friend. He is suspicious, then giddy, then suspicious again, the way the sea pulls forward and back, relentless and unreasoning. At supper, he eats too quickly, drinks too sharply. He speaks with a smile that shows too many teeth, jokes that bend into threats, promises that end as fees. His messengers ride night roads until the horses foam. carrying commands that contradict the ones from yesterday. He does not sleep well. In the small hours, he walks alone along the strand, staring at the horizon where his gone lands lie, dark as a bruise. He hurls stones into the waves as if he could make the sea pay him back. And yet, somewhere beneath the tangle of his anger and fear, a feeling lives that he will not name. It is the knowledge that he has been measured and found wanting. He was not supposed to be here. The crown came to him after others. It sits on his head like an argument he keeps losing. He longs to win impossible games, to force the world to admit he was chosen, not merely left behind when better men were finished with the throne. The barons grow tired. They have their own ledgers, their own sums, their own quiet oaths whispered in lamplight. They gather near a meadow, and parchment rustles again. Only this paper will fetter the king instead of freeing him. The words list rights and limits, boundaries and consequences, clauses like stones laid across a river, so that even a king must step carefully. John reads and rereads, each word a splinter. In private, he rages. He calls the charter a trick, a trap, the work of villains. In public, he swears upon the relics, lips pressed, eyes tired, voice ironed flat. He thinks he can unmake a promise the way he unravels a knot, patiently, slyly, tug by tug, in 1,000 small acts. But oaths are not knots. They are bridges many feet walk upon. When they break, entire crowds fall into the water together. He rides again along the coast. It is raining in the thin, needling way of English rain, a damp that insinuates itself through wool and leather. The sea pounds its ancient drumbeat. John looks down. A coin lies in his palm, a small disk of authority, the face of power made into metal. He closes his fist, opens it again. The coin gleams, then dulls as gray water splatters it. Mine, he thinks. Then the wave comes and takes the coin, and the thought with it. He will be remembered for losing. Lands, loyalty, face. But there was a man under the caricature, the man who thought order was the same as love, who believed obedience could be purchased and that fear, properly rationed, would nourish allegiance. He wanted certainty and fed himself worries instead. By the end, even the arithmetic turns against him. The ledger fills with debts he cannot collect, debts of trust, debts of patience, debts a nation pays back in a meadow with a charter the color of weathered bone. On a final night, he sits with the torch low and the wax thick on the table. He does the math one last time, tracing figures with a nail, trying to find the line where loss began, the exact miscalculation that tipped the sum. He cannot. He is tired. The parchment curls at the edges. The flame wavers. His hand, at last, goes still. Third, Charles VI of France, the king of glass and flame. He was young when the first break came, and it came like summer thunder, sudden, with a brightness that terrified. One moment the king rode in a procession, the world a ribbon of color and music, banners streaming, horses shining, courtiers laughing under their masks. The next, fear swallowed him. He thought enemies hid where faces should be, that the laughter was a blade. He struck, and the feast turned to ash. Afterward, when the horror receded, he feared his own body. He whispered to his attendants not to touch him. He moved with a carefulness that made servants weep, the caution of a man who believed that one wrong motion could shatter him into glittering pieces no one would ever gather up. I am glass, he tells the queen through pale lips, and the room grows even quieter. They pad the chairs with cushions. They remove sharp objects. They teach the palace to breathe softly. There are lucid mornings. On those days, Charles reads with swift intelligence, speaks with grace, remembers names, sees possibilities as if from a high tower. On those days, his counselors lean forward in hope, catching each phrase as a cup catches rain. Then clouds pass over the sun again. Shadows lengthen. The air shifts. Charles looks at his hands, at the veins like blue threads beneath skin, and the dread returns. He longs for stillness. For hours he stares into the flutter of a candle, watching the flame steady itself, bend, steady, as if it too must bargain with the movements of the air. He recognizes himself in the flame's tremble, beautiful, needed, and at the mercy of drafts. At night he hears the city, the muffled rumbling of carts, the crack of a hoof on stone, the lonely note of a watchman's call. He wants to answer, to say, I am here, I am not gone, I am only breakable. In the garden, a winter sun lays a thin, kind light over the hedges. He walks, wrapped in fur, footsteps soft on the gravel. A servant trails him at a respectful distance, hands hidden so the king does not see the potential of their weight. A child's laugh comes from beyond a wall. It startles him, then comforts him. Laughter is the sound of something that refuses to shatter. He closes his eyes and lets it pass through him like warm air in a chapel. He knows, when the clarity is with him, that his fear costs others dearly. He sees how the court arranges itself around his fragility, how factions root like ivy wherever conscience loosens its grip. He knows that on days when he cannot lift his thought to the horizon, others will seize the horizon and draw it, conveniently, through their own vineyards. This knowledge terrifies him more than the glass. What is a king who cannot say no without flinching? And yet, there are moments of mercy. A nun sings in the chapel, voice thin but true, and he remembers the ordinary courage of people who will never be named. A cooper mending a cask, a mother tending a fever, a mason narrowing his eyes to set a stone even when his hands ache from cold. He envies their certainty of purpose. He thinks holiness might simply be that, knowing the next right thing and then doing it quietly. They will call him the mad. Print the name in books. Attach it to stories like a bell to a neck, so the creature can always be found. But his days were not only madness. They were also a study in gentleness under threat, a fragile goodwill trying to stand upright in a wind. He wanted to be whole for his people. He could not. He wanted to be firm as oak. He was glass, and he knew it, and still he tried to warm the room with his thin flame. On a cold evening, frost gathers along the window pane in filigree. Charles leans close, breath misting the glass. For a playful instant, he raises a finger to draw the smallest crown in the frost, a child's doodle. Seeing it, he smiles, a shy, astonished thing. The crown melts almost at once. The water runs down in two clear lines, like tears he is too weary to shed. Fourth, Henry VI of England, a prayer in a storm. He loves books the way some love music. He loves the quiet discipline of a page, the smell of parchment and ink, the promise that thought can be arranged into peace. Henry does not desire clangor and banners. He desires order and grace. He is king by accident of blood and fortune, and he wishes, not for the first time, that the accident had been someone else's. In the chapel, he kneels long after others have risen. The stones press his knees. The candle smoke lifts. The psalm lingers in the rafters like a bird reluctant to leave. He asks for wisdom, for patience, for the strength to do what is gentle in a world that rewards the loud. Around him, the machinery of power creaks and shouts, petitions, claims, quarrels that want steel for answers. He offers silence, and it is mistaken for vacancy. He has spells when the world dims. Words lose their edges. Faces blur. He sits with his hands open on his knees, as if waiting for rain. In those intervals, others step forward, commanding, vivid, bright with purpose that may or may not be kind. They argue in rooms heated by urgency. They slam doors. They ride out to make the realm obey itself. And Henry, whose nature leans toward forgiveness, cannot always tell when forgiveness is a virtue and when it is a wound. He founds places of learning because he believes knowledge cools anger. He dreams of halls where boys will grow into men who listen before they command, where disputation is a practice in humility rather than triumph. He imagines a country knitted together by shared understanding instead of fear. But his imagination cannot staunch the old red ways of settling. The roads fill with armed men. Fields wait for harvest under the nervous eye of the sky. Sometimes he walks among common folk disguised, an ancient royal habit that is half masquerade, half prayer. He sees a woman balancing a pail, her back straight despite years of lifting. He sees a cobbler squinting at a seam. He hears children chase each other, shrieking with a joy wild enough to shame despair. These moments steady him. They do not change the councils, but they change the king who must go to them. In private, he writes a little, lines that are not laws. He writes about mercy, about the danger of haste. He writes, not well, not artfully, but earnestly, and that is its own kind of music. When the paper is full, he folds it and places it between the covers of a prayer book. Someone else will decide which armies go where. He will decide this, that a man should be slow to wrath even when he is certain, most of all when he is certain. War, however, is not slow. It advances like weather. It takes what it wants. Storms of red and white roses break across England. The heraldry of grievance flaps on many hills. Henry stands in the doorway of a council chamber, and for a moment no one sees him. He watches men he loves become instruments of forces they barely understand. He feels the pull to choose a side as if the world were a river and he a branch being dragged into its current. He whispers a psalm instead. They call him weak. Perhaps they are right. It takes a certain hardness to govern when the heart is soft. Yet there is another kind of strength, the kind that keeps one's hands open in a world that wants fists. Henry's tragedy is not that he lacked conviction. It is that his conviction toward kindness was poorly matched to an hour that demanded iron. On an evening washed in rain, he stands under an arch and listens to the water drum on the courtyard. The smell of wet stone rises like incense. A young monk passes, head bowed, and the king asks him, gently, to lift his eyes. They look at each other for the space of a breath. Pray for me, Henry says, not because prayer is magic, but because it is an admission that he is small, and that smallness can still be honest. He will not end well. Most kings do not when storms have gathered around their names, but in the last light, when the chapel is nearly dark and the wick glows a steady ember, Henry understands something he has tried to say his whole life, that leadership without love is a noise, and love without courage is a whisper the wind takes. He had love. He searched for courage within it. The world demanded the reverse. He rests his forehead against the cool stone of the chapel door. Outside, the rain slackens. The night deepens into the kind of quiet that feels like a promise. Thin, breakable, but a promise all the same. Soft cadence for transition. 4 crowns, 4 weights, one body too frail, one will too narrow, one mind too breakable, one heart too gentle. Their errors were not the same, yet all pressed upon the people who slept under their rule. The bakers and smiths, the mothers and children, the writers and the readers, souls who wanted only to live. Now, let your breath lengthen, the torches pop and settle. The corridors grow still. We will turn from the personal rooms of these kings to the wider chamber of their age, where choices ripple outward and history, patient and unblinking, writes its longer line. Open the doors of the palace and step into the weather of the realm. The king's private missteps do not stay private. They travel outward like ripples crossing a mill pond, touching every shore, field and market, church and tavern, barracks and nursery. If a hand that trembles signs an order, the ink dries on 100 lives at once. If a mind that wanders declares a tax at noon and a reprieve at dusk, the confusion does not vanish with the candles. It lodges in ledgers, in pantries, in the thin faces of children who learn to count not by numbers, but by missing loaves. Hunger, written in policy, then in bone. The tax arrives before the harvest. It often does, but under a foolish sovereign, it arrives like winter too early. Before the grain has turned, before the rye has shaken free of damp. A clerk in a warm room calculates neat percentages. A collector with cold hands knocks on a door where the bread has already been sliced thinner than hope. He brings a scale and a parchment and the same apology he offered at the last cottage. Orders are orders. The crown needs silver. The wars need horses. The court needs wine. The king needs proof that he is powerful enough to demand what is not there. In the village ovens, loaves grow smaller. A mother stretches a pot with water and wild greens. She tastes it first, not to check the flavor, but to measure if there will be enough for 3 bowls instead of 2. A miller lowers his eyes when men complain about tolls, because he knows the count of sacks and the pressure from above and the pressure below are turning him into a hinge that will break. A baker trims crusts and saves them in a cloth bundle, the way one saves kindling against a hard storm. The tax is not only silver. It is the hour a man must walk to the Lord's granary to argue for mercy. It is the day a woman spends in a line that curls like rope through a stone hall while a steward decides whether to sign the small release she needs to buy salt. It is the bargaining away of small futures, the chicken not kept for eggs, the seed not saved for spring, the daughter not sent to a distant aunt who could have taught her letters. Each choice is simple and costs the same thing: tomorrow. In the first hunger, people become still. In the second, they become clever. Soup grows thicker with nettles. Bread gets a new recipe whispered from neighbor to neighbor. Add boiled beans. Mash them fine. Pretend the flavor is tradition rather than necessity. Children learn to scrape bowls and to laugh at their own growling stomachs, so the sound feels like a game and not an alarm. And then, when foolishness persists, when policies change with the moon, and assessments are revised as carelessly as a rumor, stillness and cleverness give way to something quieter, a bone-deep fatigue that settles over the thatch and the hedges like fog. Wars declared in rooms far from fields, a king who needs to prove himself, or distract himself, or simply believes war is a lever that makes the world notice his hand, calls banners. He likes the look of a map on a table, the clear lines, the tidy borders, the way a finger can sweep across a problem and declare it solved. Maps do not show mud. They do not show what rain does to a canvas tent, what fear does to a boy who has never stood under a hail of stones. They do not show the faces of the people who must feed the armies that pass and pass again, scraping the land like a second, sharper harvest. Soldiers tramp down roads that were once paths for market carts. The iron ring of their steps can be heard long before they are seen. Housewives lift pots from windowsills and draw shutters, not because soldiers are cruel, most are simply hungry, but because hungry men take. A hen disappears here, a coin there, a dry cloak lifted from a peg because the wind has teeth today. Later, the same men will kneel in a wayside chapel and confess, whispering the guilt into wood that has heard it all before and will again. The foolishness of command displays itself in small confusions that grow into large griefs. Orders arrive late, or arrive twice with opposite instructions. A hill that should be held is abandoned. A ford no wider than a street takes a day to cross because someone who was never wet in his life decided the wagons must go first. Panic behaves like fire. It leaps. Men who would gladly stand in a tight line against a clear mortal danger cannot summon the same bravery against the haze of, "What now? Who said? Are we sure?" They break, and then the breaking spreads, not because they are cowards, but because the chain of sense linking each act to a purpose has snapped. When the army moves on, the land remains. Fields bear the pockmarks of cook fires. The hedges are low, where branches were hacked for fuel. The village green, once a place for auctions and dancing, wears the ruts of wheels and the sting of words shouted too loudly by men who were not listening to themselves. Children play at soldiers anyway. They fashion banners out of old cloth and carve wooden swords and run in the dusk, whooping. Their games end in truce. Real wars rarely do. The court that governs by rumor inside the palace, folly sounds different. It is a meeting that starts late because someone important is sulking. It is an appointment reversed and reversed again. It is a seal used like a toy to make the wax look pretty. A wise counselor frames his words carefully, trimming them like hedges, so they neither scratch the king nor hide the path entirely. A foolish favorite strolls in with a hunting story and leaves with a new office, having asked for it between jokes. Men who should be in the archive, reading, are instead in the corridor, listening. Under a capricious sovereign, every corridor is a weather vane. People travel it not to arrive at rooms, but at winds. Which way does the mind blow today? They ask each other with smiles that do not reach the eyes. A woman who manages the household accounts, a position of quiet power, learns to wait an extra day before paying certain invoices, because decrees have a way of changing shape overnight. A secretary keeps 3 versions of the same proclamation. The one he was told to write, the one he expects to be asked for tomorrow, and the one that might actually keep the peace if anyone would sign it. The court becomes a theater, and the play is rewritten daily. Petitioners rehearse in whispers on the stone steps. A merchant bows over and over until the movement is muscle memory. A widow stands straighter with each breath, practicing a spine that will not bend when a clerk scoffs at her request. In antechambers, people tell stories about the king, tender ones on lucid days, gentle jokes when the fear is too tight, and cruel ones after wine, because cruelty feels like bravery when the real danger cannot be named. Behind the tapestry of spectacle, servants keep the country functioning in miniature. The master of the stables makes sure the horses eat before the courtiers do, because a hungry horse is a slow relay, and slow relays make bad law. The chief laundress rations lie when the river runs low, because even lords need clean collars in a crisis. The head cook keeps a separate pot for those who arrive shaking. Messengers off the winter road, beggars, guards whose faces say more than their instructions. It is not policy, it is wisdom. It keeps the building kinder than the throne. The tavern's weather report. News travels best inside a cup. In town after town, the tavern gives the realm its voice. By day, it is a marketplace made of words. By night, it is a theater with a floor for a stage and ale for applause. Under a foolish king, the tavern becomes a clinic of laughter, of rumor, of relief. Humor is a poultice that draws out poison without breaking the skin. It does not fix a fracture, but it makes the night softer around it. Have you heard? Someone asks every night as the first mugs are lifted. What now? Comes the answer, every night, with the same wary smile. A mason repeats a joke he learned from a tinker who swears he heard it at court. Our king believes he is made of glass, the mason begins, then pauses, looking at the faces around him. He revises the punchline to kindness, and when they laugh, it is not at the king's breaking, but at their own. How carefully they walked around their hearts today, as if one more knock might turn grief into shards. On other nights, the joke is about the king's love of ledgers. He tried to count the rain, someone says, and the room shakes with the pleasure of a picture too foolish to be true and too true to be comfortable. Beneath the laughter, there are lists. Who returned from the levee and who did not? Which road is safer this week? Which steward has begun to accept eggs when last month he demanded silver? Where a certain abbey still gives bread on Fridays. Women hear these lists with a practiced ear. Men pretend to ignore them, and then ask again at the door, hat in hand, voice low. Was it the east road or the north one, they said. A singer with a raw, beautiful voice tries a new ballad. It is not about the king. It is about a river that runs crooked and still finds the sea. People hum it for weeks. Songs can carry what speeches cannot. A shared understanding that the land itself is wiser than any crown, and that patience, too, has a current. The counterweights, clever advisors, steadier hands, strong women, folly rarely rules alone. Around the throne, other minds set small stones along the edges of the stream, coaxing policy to flow in safer channels. A chancellor drafts letters that say, in due course, when the order said, at once, buying time for better counsel to arrive. A treasurer shifts coin quietly from spectacle to salt, ensuring that barrels are full even when the feast is not. A captain of the guard invents a new duty roster that keeps hot tempers apart, not because anyone asked, but because he has seen enough needless fights to know how to fold the day so it does not tear. And then there are the women who often govern without the title. A queen who reads the accounts at dawn, lips moving as she turns columns into decisions. A widowed countess who keeps 3 counties fed because she has mastered the arithmetic of grain and grace. A merchant's wife who organizes a relief kitchen after a levy strips the town, her apron stout as armor, her voice warmer than law. In a monastery infirmary, a prioress quiets a frightened soldier by placing his hand over his own heart and telling him to listen. It is not the drums you must obey now, she says. It is this. He sleeps. In the morning, he weeps. Then he goes home. Not all advisors are gentle. Some are flinty, because flint has its uses. A steward refuses to carry out the most reckless orders and takes the punishment meant for those below him. A judge refuses a bribe when refusal is dangerous. A scribe copies the charter that will bind the crown to care, not because he is a revolutionary, but because he is tired of writing the words by whim and would like to write by right before he dies. These counterweights are not always celebrated. They do not always win, but they make the difference between a bad reign and a ruined country. They are the second weather, the humane climate within which people can still plant and marry and teach sons how to mend harness and daughters how to read the sky for rain. The church, the guilds, the quiet networks. When government is erratic, other structures grow steadier out of instinct. The churchyard well becomes a bulletin board where notices appear in ink and chalk. A spare bed, a missing mule, a candlelit vigil for luck. Guild halls keep lists of families needing work. Journeymen take smaller wages so the youngest apprentices can keep eating. In the bakery, a sign appears: bread before dawn for those who must travel. No one admits who pays for the flour left in the corner, but many suspect the same white-haired alderman who speaks little and counts carefully for the sake of others. At the abbey, the almoner expands the soup line with a kind of merciful cunning. He asks the miller to donate the bran he would have wasted. He teaches the women who wait how to flavor it with lovage and rosemary, so the taste is dignity and not despair. A monk writes letters for those who cannot, transforming grief into script so that news can move without breaking the bearer. My son has not come home, a mother dictates. If you see him, tell him the goats have multiplied, and his sister laughs in her sleep. The letter travels farther than hope sometimes does. That is not nothing. What fear does to law, and what law tries to do back under a panicked ruler. Laws multiply the way rabbits do. Quickly, without much thought for the field that must feed them. One decree forbids gatherings after sunset. Another punishes the sale of knives. A third requires oaths so frequently that the meaning of swearing thins to a thread. When tomorrow contradicts today, honest men become accidental criminals, and clever men flourish in the cracks. In response, the country develops its own jurisprudence of common sense. A reeve looks the other way when a neighbor breaks a foolish rule that keeps a field from being sown. A mayor enforces the curfew gently, go home now, and saves the fine for those who truly do harm. In a meadow, not far from the capital, men meet to draft terms that will bind not only this king, but any who come after. The document is long and plain. It says, in many careful ways, the crown must remember it sits on a human head, and that head is not the only one that matters. The children and the elders, grandmothers, become historians by necessity, threading memory into bedtime to keep courage from fraying. There was a bad winter before this, one tells a child, with the calm of someone who has watched many storms arrive and depart. We learned to put the loaves high, not for thieves, but for hope. Do you see? Hope must also be placed where it can rise. The child falls asleep, holding a wooden spoon as if it were a scepter. In schoolrooms, the alphabet is taught around shortages. A is for apple, the teacher says, and the children laugh because there are none today. They draw one anyway, a bright circle of red chalk, a promise. B is for bread, and a few heads bow. C is for candle, and someone jokes that the lesson must end by noon if they are to save tallow. Learning becomes its own rebellion, a refusal to let folly set the boundaries of thought. Old men sit on benches and offer weather reports of the soul. This will pass, says one, and means the panic. This must not pass, says another, and means the lesson. Between them, a silence like a stitched seam holds the village together. The cadence of ordinary mercy. In a foolish reign, the miracle is not a sudden rescue. It is the stubbornness of ordinary mercy. A midwife walks 5 miles through sleet because a child is coming who will not wait for politics. A blacksmith mends a neighbor's plow for half the usual price and says nothing of it in church because the left hand does not need the right hand's applause. A guard shares an orange with a prisoner on a winter morning, the bright fragrance a shocking proof that sweetness still exists. These acts do not undo bad law or stop a war. They do something else. They keep the soul fluent in kindness so that when sense returns to the throne, the country has not forgotten how to be a country. The mood of a nation under a foolish crown. Fear is the bass note. It thrums beneath everything. But above it float other melodies. Defiance in jokes, patience in lines, generosity in kitchens, quiet in chapels, craft in workshops. Despair comes in gusts. Hope comes in habits. People learn to time their lives not to the king's tempers, but to the reliable clocks of sun and season, market and mass, planting and harvest, washing and mending, birth and burial, song and sleep. When the king is cruel, the people become careful. When the king is confused, the people become clear where they can. We will meet on Wednesdays. We will share what we have. We will keep our word, even if those above us forget theirs. And when the king is ill, truly ill, the country, cursing him in the tavern, may still light a candle in the church for his mind, because a healed mind is safer for everyone than a broken one. Soft bridge to the wider view. So the crown wobbles, and thousands steady the table. The ledger lies, and a baker corrects it with a ladle. A campaign fails, and a widow takes in 2 apprentices, so a craft does not die in the smoke. A joke keeps the room breathing. A prayer keeps the hand steady. A charter makes the river of law run a little straighter. Breathe with them now, those bakers and smiths, mothers and monks, soldiers and singers, counselors and queens. Feel how the realm keeps choosing, in 1,000 small ways, to be more than the mistake at its apex. Hear the bells in the fog, slow and heavy, marking not only time but endurance. We will turn, gently, from these rooms and roads to the larger map, beyond appetite and rumor, beyond one harvest and one winter, to watch how the tremors of folly redraw borders, rewrite agreements, and teach the future what it must never forget. History rarely falls all at once. It softens first, like wax near a candle, then caves along the lines of heat and habit. Under foolish or fragile rulers, the softening accelerates. Decisions made in rooms of velvet ripple outward into fields and shipyards, law courts and taverns, until entire countries begin to tilt. Step back now, gently, and watch 3 great tiltings. France during the 100 Years' War, England at Runnymede, and Spain in the dusk of the Habsburgs. See how a single weak mind, or a narrow will, can become a lever long enough to move more than a nation. It can move an age. The 100 Years' War was not a single continuous roar. It was a long thunderstorm that drifted across generations, sometimes distant, sometimes overhead, promising harvests and delivering floods. Within it, France learned how dangerous it is when a realm must lean on a monarch who cannot always stand. When Charles VI sat the throne, France did not simply face England, it faced itself. The king's mind, lucid one month and clouded the next, taught the court to live by rumor. In that climate, factions multiplied. Two names, Armagnac and Burgundian, began as political affiliations and hardened into identities, then into trenches. A cousin murdered a cousin. A city shut its gates against its own children. A bridge stained with blood became a boundary no treaty could fully erase. The king, who should have been France's center, became, through no cruelty of his own, a vacancy that others tried to fill with knives. Vacancies invite foreign hands. English armies did not merely conquer. They entered through openings created by French quarrels. A victory on muddy ground, arrows hissing through rain, armored men sinking like mills into the clay, turned from a battle into a parable because the kingdom beneath the battered banners was divided. Later, when a treaty tried to disinherit a living prince and name a foreign king the heir, parchment simply formalized what folly had already drafted: a France that could not decide who France was. And yet, even in fracture, the country remembered itself. A girl from the edges of maps rode into the king's presence with a steadiness that no chancellery could manufacture. She did not heal his mind, but she steadied the realms. Cities that had drifted toward despair tolled bells again. Coronations resumed the old choreography. The war did not end that year, nor the next, but the weather changed. It is the way of nations. When the apex fails, renewal often rises from the margins, clear, stubborn, and astonishingly local. The lesson lingers softly. A monarch's incapacity magnifies every existing crack. Rivalries that might have been managed become civil wars. Clever enemies become decisive ones. The cost is not only military, it is cultural and spiritual. The loss of a sense that the crown and the country are, in some essential way, the same song. Under a king who believed himself glass, France learned that the polity must sometimes be oak without him. In time, the branches held. England, from ledgers to liberties. Turn now to a river meadow where grass bends under summer wind and tents flap like small sailing ships. Here, the outcomes of one man's misjudgments grew into a document that outlived him by centuries. John of England did not intend to found a constitutional tradition. He intended to win money, deference, land. And in trying to force the arithmetic of rule with fear and fees, he taught those he ruled to count something else entirely. John lost wars, and with them, dignity. He collected revenues, and with them, rage. He treated loyalty as a commodity, bought dear and sold dearer, until the nobles who carried swords realized that their oaths had been converted into invoices. When a king believes obedience can be invoiced, the realm soon discovers it can also be itemized in reverse. Limits, procedures, rights. The great parchment raised in that meadow was, in style, a list. In effect, a spine. It took royal will, the ancient swelling muscle at the center of medieval politics, and braided around it sinews of by law, by counsel, by custom, and by due process. It did not create democracy. It did something more durable for that century. It created friction. Kings after John could move, but not without rubbing against obligations that sparked heat if ignored. Taxes demanded talk. Arrests demanded reasons. Land seizures demanded redress. The crown remained heavy. It simply ceased to be absolute weight. Law, long a learned profession, became a public expectation. This outcome grew from the soil of misrule. Had John been judicious, generous, and successful in France, the barons would have had fewer reasons and less nerve to demand charters. His small meannesses and grand failures hardened their resolve. That is another of history's quiet jokes. Personal vice plants public virtue. The man who loved ledgers forced a nation to start one of its own, line by line, with columns for what a ruler may not do. Centuries later, when new disputes erupted over ships and parliaments, when pamphlets sailed across oceans and colonists wrote petitions in clear, spare prose, they were quoting an echo. The meadow's wind still moved their pages. The habit of limiting a crown had become a habit of mind, and habits of mind are the real infrastructure of freedom. In that sense, a foolish king's reign was not merely a cautionary tale, it was a founding one. Spain, twilight in a great house. Empires end in many ways. Some collapse with a crash, others dim, room by room, until only a few candles are left and people begin to speak in whispers so as not to disturb the old walls. Spain's long twilight after Charles II felt like that. Less a catastrophe than a lingering exhaustion. Charles himself was not wicked. He was, tragically, unequal to the machine he inherited. For generations, that machine had run on silver and faith and the discipline of administrators who believed the sun would indeed never set. But fine mechanisms need maintenance. When the man at the top grows too frail to set priorities or choose between rival factions, maintenance gives way to makeshift. Offices are granted to keep peace rather than to keep accounts. Expenses are justified by heritage rather than by need. Fleets sail late or not at all. Under such conditions, decline is not a moral judgment. It is a mathematical one. Revenues wobble. Costs do not. Far from Madrid, garrisons hold banners aloft with fewer hands. At court, remedies are attempted, reforms drafted, programs announced, and then diluted by the very bargaining they require to pass. Rival powers watch, not with contempt, but with the practical attention of neighbors who hear beams creak in a big house. They offer help that doubles as leverage. They prepare their claims for the day when the last, frail owner will die without a clear heir. That day came. The question of succession was not simply a family matter, it was a continental one. With the king's death, the map unrolled. Lines were redrawn, not in ink, but in treaties, which are merely the slow handwriting of wars. Spain did not disappear. It reconfigured. A younger branch of a different dynasty took the keys to the house and started repairs. New rules, new ministries, a new energy. Yet pieces of the estate, the distant wings and gardens, went to others. What had been one coherent household became a cluster of addresses. That is the administrative face of a decline often pinned on a single man, a long chain of choices deferred until choice itself is made by events. If folly had no place at court, would any of this have happened? Perhaps not so quickly, perhaps not so completely. Great powers ebb for many reasons: competition, technology, trade routes that change their minds. But uncertainty at the center accelerates all of them. Charles II's reign became a kind of permission slip for Europe to rearrange itself. Where a firm hand might have negotiated, a trembling one signed. Where a resolute vision might have ordered priorities, a weary gaze drifted from ledger to reliquary and back again, and time did what time always does. It moved on. The wider lesson: weakness at the apex, strength in the seams. What do these three tiltings share? Not identical causes, not identical ends. Rather, a pattern. When the head cannot hold, the body must compensate. Sometimes, compensation succeeds. France, torn within, still found the courage to finish its song. Sometimes it transforms. England learned, almost against its will, that law could be taught to speak back to power. Sometimes it simply absorbs. Spain continued, chastened and altered, learning to live with less reach and a different rhythm. There is also a quieter, more intimate pattern beneath the flags. Folly above breeds clarity below. In France, guilds and parishes threaded a net that kept communities from falling through the hole where policy should have been. In England, nobles and clerks built a dam of clauses to manage a tide that would drown them otherwise. In Spain, administrators and reformers, some devout, some pragmatic, kept books and borders from unraveling entirely, preparing the way for a later, steadier hand. The resilience of the ordinary is history's favorite understudy, rarely credited on the marquee, always ready when the lead falters. And yet, we should not romanticize the cost. Rural cemeteries count decisions more honestly than chronicles do. A foolish levy shows up as a child buried in winter. A reckless war appears as a field that will be fallow for a year too many. A paralyzed court translates into a ship that never sailed and therefore never returned with wages that would have married two people and roofed three houses. These are not metaphors. They are how policy becomes weather. Still, there is hope in the long view. Bad rains seed good habits. A charter signed under duress becomes a precedent honored by choice. A fractured land, once healed, remembers the price of division and builds customs to avoid it. A great house that dimmed learns, in the next generation, the patience of repair. Institutions, parliaments, councils, courts, guilds, are the social memory of these lessons. The way a body remembers a wound and strengthens the muscle around it. So we return to our initial thought, whispered like a lullaby with steel in it. Stupidity and impotence at the summit can damage a realm more surely than any enemy. Enemies are visible. Folly is intimate. Enemies batter the walls. Folly removes a brick each night while the household sleeps. And yet, because folly is intimate, the cure is intimate too. A wiser counselor speaks and is heard. A village keeps faith with its own standards until the court remembers its better self. A charter takes up residence in a nation's conscience and refuses to leave. Breathe with that. Let the anger of unfairness soften into the steadier warmth of understanding. The past does not exist to frighten us. It exists to teach our pulse a calmer beat. In every age, crowns slip. In every age, people pick them up, not to wear, but to set upon a sturdier cushion of law, custom, and care. That is the real work of history. The knitting together after the tear, soft bridge to the next movement. Now the map can fold again. The soldiers go home, the clerks cap their ink, the bakers shape tomorrow's loaves, and the bells mark only the hour, not the alarm. We have looked from the balcony. We have seen the pattern. Let the room grow quieter. In the next part of our journey, the tension will rise one last time. Escalation, crisis, and then the gentle untying of knots, until the story and your breath fall into the long, even rhythm of sleep. The air before the storm. A realm can hold its breath for only so long. Courts learn to whisper. Villages learn to wait. Armies learn to stand in damp fields, watching clouds that do not decide whether they are rain or fog. But there comes a day when breath must turn into sound. Orders are given too sharply. Petitions refused too casually. Taxes lifted too soon. A treaty signed too late. The pause breaks. The country moves. Intrigues tighten. Corridors grow narrow. Inside palaces, the weather changes by the hour. A minister falls from favor at noon and is seen, bewildered, on the stairs by dusk, clutching a purse that suddenly feels too light. An order goes out to arrest a man who was honored last week. Another order follows to forgive him. A third order, quiet and cruel, says nothing at all and lets confusion do the work. Courtiers become cartographers of moods. They map the eddies of fear, the crosswinds of rumor. On the margins of those maps, where a wise king would draw roads, folly draws mazes. Paranoia seeps into the marrow of protocol. Doors are watched. Letters are opened, then resealed with hands that hope their neatness hides the crime. A favorite insists the guard be replaced at midnight, then again at 2, because danger seems loudest when candles burn low. The captain of the guard obeys, and in the shuffle, a different danger grows, the kind that wears the face of one's own allies. A realm that is always flinching eventually swings at its shadow. Outside, the country gathers its replies. In the streets and fields, patience frays into plots. Not the grand conspiracies of plays and pamphlets, but the homegrown, practical kind. Who will speak to whom, where, when the bell tolls twice? Which bridge is watched? Which gate is bribable? Which steward, offended one time too many, knows the exact hinge to push? Men of rank count exasperations like coins and find themselves rich enough, at last, to spend them. They summon their cousins. They ride with banners folded, then unfurl them in a meadow where the grass has the look of a congregation rising. Elsewhere, people who have no banners choose other instruments. Bakers keep ledgers of generosity like secret charters. Priors shorten litanies so that frightened men can sleep a little sooner. Women in markets speak in codes that are merely kindness arranged into efficiency. Buy the onions, I'll bring the broth. If power is the art of making others move, this is the counter art, choosing to move in ways power did not intend. The first breaks. On a road rhymed with salt, messengers speed past each other like swallows, each carrying a different version of tomorrow. Somewhere a fortress that should hold out for a month surrenders in a week because the commander receives 2 letters, one brave, one panicked, and cannot decide which truth to obey. In another place, a gate swings open from within because a starving garrison has learned what hunger does to loyalty. A river crossing that looked simple on a map becomes a long gray day of mud and curses because a foolish mind believed time is clay and will keep its shape. News travels along tavern benches as fast as it does along royal corridors. They fought today, someone says, and hands tighten around cups. The details are wrong. The conclusion is right. The quiet is over. 4 crowns at their crest. John of England stands in a tent smelling of wet wool and ink. The parchment spread before him is not a plan of conquest. It is a demand that power kneel to process. He signs when he must, swears what he intends to unswear, and rides away feeling tricked by language itself. He tries to unmake the compromise by force, and for a while, force answers. A castle falls. A road is cleared. Yet something larger will not move for him anymore. The confidence of those he rules. The more he squeezes, the more his realm flows through his fingers. He grows smaller inside his armor. In the end, illness claims what fury could not hold. The crown passes to a child. The charter, pressed by many hands, remains. John's last arithmetic is a column of losses that could not be balanced, because numbers cannot be bullied into loving a king. Charles VI of France sits in a room made gentle for him. Cushions thick. edges blunted, voices low. As his kingdom trembles, in sharper rooms he cannot bear to enter. Clans within the court call themselves by new names and treat each other as foreigners. Foreign armies notice and treat the land as prize. A pageant of banners advances through fog. Arrows fall like iron rain. A treaty proclaims a future in which France will wear a different name on its tongue. The king, sometimes clear and sometimes lost, is pulled through the script like a figure in a tapestry, present, central, and yet forever woven by others. He grows thin on the diet of careful meals and unslept nights. He dies not in a blaze, but in a fading. And his country survives him by remembering it was older than his fear. Henry VI of England kneels while the council shouts. He loves peace and birth schools and hopes that prayer can outlast grievance. But the roses bloom red and white on standards that will not be reasoned with. Battles come with seasons. Victory alternates like weather. A city door is barred against him. Months later, opened again. He is deposed, restored, and then folded away at last into solitude. The official story lists crimes and claims. The truer story is quieter, a gentle heart set to a brutal task. In a stone place at night, he will not see dawn. Outside, rain hammers the gutters with the regularity he wished government possessed. When the sky clears, the quarrel goes on without him. But the hush that follows his passing has the character of regret, even among those who called him weak. Charles II of Spain prays in a chapel warmed by a small fire, while ambassadors measure his breath like an hourglass. Factions in Madrid argue like tailors over cloth that will not stretch. Abroad, crowned neighbors write letters that are courtesy disguising appetite. The king, a man of fragile body and earnest, narrow hope, signs as he has always signed, pious, hesitant, sincere. And time, which has indulged him longer than it had reason to, finally declines another extension. With his last exhale, a long shelf of Europe tilts. Treaties spill from desks. Armies step. A younger dynasty nails its emblem above the door. Spain does not vanish, but the house shrinks, and the corridors are rearranged, and the old servants stand in familiar rooms that feel suddenly smaller. The court unraveling to the end. In all four stories, the palace never truly understands that the center has moved. Even as riders change loyalties and towns calculate odds, the chambers of ceremony keep setting out goblets and reciting the old forms. A foolhardy order goes out at midnight to arrest a man who left at dusk. A food taster fusses over spices while peasants barter bread for candles. A herald perfects a flourish of trumpets for a procession that will never occur. The choreography of power continues a step past its music. Then the musicians stop. The people, finishing the thought, what governments cannot resolve, customs often can. Nobles, stung into prudence, bind the crown to counsel. Cities, tired of being canvases for other men's ambitions, negotiate their liberties and pay for them in coin and careful obedience. Parishes turn charity into a system. Guilds write rules stricter than any royal decree, because the only way to trust a scale is to agree, together, what a pound is. None of these acts defeats a king. They defeat disorder, the climaxes that do not thunder. Not every culmination is a battlefield. Many are rooms. A sick room where a king finds out the body will not be argued with. A council chamber where a seal is pressed into wax, and the sound it makes is the small kiss of limits arriving. A chapel where a monarch who loved the quiet more than he loved command folds his hands one last time. A corridor where an official whose career was built on flattery turns his face to the wall because the game has ended and he does not know how to speak plainly. Battles matter, so do rooms. A realm is decided in both. The fallings off deposition wears many costumes. It can be formal, robes removed, titles rewritten. It can be furtive, a door that does not open, a guard who does not bow, a document that, when read aloud, makes yesterday's authority sound like a story. It can be natural, a death that nobody dared name necessary, now spoken of as inevitable. In every case, the result is the same. The crown that was supposed to save the man does not. It never did. Crowns save systems, not souls. John leaves a slim inheritance and a thick precedent. Charles VI leaves a riven court and, paradoxically, a people newly aware of themselves. Henry VI leaves a tenderness history often mocks, and a country exhausted, inching toward a different kind of strength. Charles II leaves a will that reads like a map, and a Europe that re-inks its borders in response. None of them gets what the stories promise kings, an ending that looks like triumph. They get what history promises people, consequences. The room grows calm. Listen now as the noise recedes. The banners are furled. The horses steam quietly in their stalls. Clerks, who have been awake too long, cap their inkwells and lean their foreheads into their palms. In villages, shutters are drawn against a wind that finally sounds like weather again, not destiny. A widow counts her jars and finds, astonishingly, that there is enough for porridge tomorrow. A blacksmith, who swung a sword at noon and a hammer at dusk, decides to swing the hammer again in the morning. A child wakes from a bad dream, takes a sip of water, and sleeps. Lessons begin to settle, the way silt settles in a river once the flood passes. The first is simple. One man's weakness at the summit can weaken a realm more cruelly than any enemy. The second is kinder. What breaks at the top is often mended at the edges by people who will never be chronicled, but whose patience is the true treasury of nations. The third is quietest and most important for sleep. Even foolish rains end. The night lengthens, the pace slows. The future, which does not hurry, arrives anyway. Softening the edges, carrying you forward. Breathe in, slow and warm. Let the last clangor slide away from your mind, like armor taken off and set carefully on a bench. Picture each crown, glittering, heavy, and finally still, resting not on a troubled brow, but on a velvet cushion in an empty hall. The torches along the walls lower themselves to embers. The hall's great door closes with a sound like a book ending. The story has not vanished. It has folded itself into understanding. Somewhere, a bell counts the hour, not the alarm. Somewhere, a scribe, who has copied charters all his life, writes a final line and smiles because it is neat and true. Somewhere, a queen who was braver than anyone knew lays down her pen and opens a window to let in the night air. Somewhere, a field, fought over twice in a generation, grows barley again. Let that be the cadence you keep now. Endings that heal into beginnings, noise that heals into hush, crowns that could not save their wearers but taught the world, by failing, how to save itself. Let the lesson sit beside you like a folded cloak. Let your breath match the slow bell. Let the room darken by degrees, kind and sure. We will go on, gently, to the final movement, toward reflection, toward ease, toward sleep, carrying only what helps and placing the rest back into the past, where it can do no harm. Philosophical reflection, the weight and limit of power. Even the brightest crown cannot protect a human mind from its own weather. Metal shines, flesh trembles. Authority magnifies whatever it rests upon. Wisdom becomes gentler and more generous. Folly becomes harsher and more swift. We have walked through halls where command sounded like a prayer, and through chambers where it sounded like a rumor. In every place, the same lesson waited patiently in the corner like a quiet witness. Power without wisdom turns into a curse. It is a candle held too close to the page. At first it seems to clarify the letters, and then the paper darkens, smokes, curls, and the meaning is lost. Kings tried to outrun this truth with armies and seals, with ceremonies and splendid names. They tried to hide from it behind velvet and law. But the body does not recognize titles. It obeys its own frailties. The mind does not salute. It either steadies or sways. And the soul, whatever we call the deepest part of a person, cannot be bullied into courage or bribed into clarity. It must be grown patiently, like a garden, or it will wither in the very sunshine that was meant to nourish it. When a foolish heart wears a crown, the whole world learns the cost of pretending. Courtiers pretend the order makes sense. Generals pretend the plan is sound. Clerks pretend the ink is law enough. The people, in their kitchens and fields, pretend they do not see the wobble at the top, because noticing it too sharply makes sleep difficult and work impossible. Yet reality waits. It is not offended. It is only insistent. What is unwise will fall apart, whether it is a policy or a procession, a siege or a sentence. The timing varies. The direction is the same. And still, because history is kinder than it appears, it gives us another lesson braided into the first. Where power fails, patience gathers. Where crowns confuse, communities remember themselves. Bakers add a ladle to the pot. A judge writes a ruling that is both strict and human. A queen reads the accounts with a firm, unshowy mind. A monk shortens a litany so the fearful can go home and rest. This is not romance. It is the ordinary heroism that civilizations run on. It is why, in the long view, disasters look like teachers who spoke without raising their voice. So, let the glitter fade. Let the scepter rest. The deeper music is not in the fanfare. It is in the cadence of care. To rule wisely is to join that music. To rule foolishly is to drown it for a time, and only for a time, because melodies that belong to human dignity always find their way back. Breathe with that, in and out, slowly, kindly, as steady as a bell marking the hour. Connection to the present. What we keep, what we choose. We do not live in castles. We live in apartments and houses, in neighborhoods and towns stitched together by roads and screens and schedules. But the old pattern still hums underneath. Titles have changed. Pressures have not. We still ask, who decides? Who cares? Who listens? The answer is no longer one person in a jeweled chair. It is all of us in a complicated chorus. And that means the lesson of foolish kings belongs to us as a daily practice, not a distant curiosity. History does not educate us with triumphs. It educates us with mistakes, because mistakes are repeatable in any century, by any person. We do not need a crown to be careless with power. We have small powers everywhere, at a meeting, at a kitchen table, on a sidewalk, online. Each carries the same temptation the kings faced, to act quickly instead of wisely, to be obeyed instead of understood, to be right instead of honest, to protect pride instead of people. The remedy is the same too, and it is humbler than a coronation. It is the pause before speaking. The question asked twice. The willingness to be corrected without feeling smaller. the choice to build processes that outlast moods. And look how much sturdier the world becomes when we do. A family sets simple rules they keep even when they're tired, and suddenly mornings are calmer. A team writes decisions down so memory can stop doing the work of fairness, and resentment diminishes like fog under sun. A city agrees on what enough means for food and shelter, and the arguments become about methods rather than about whether kindness is owed. These are modern charters, signed not on meadow parchment, but in ordinary lives, binding not a king, but a community to its better self. We also remember something our medieval friends learned by necessity, not to anchor our emotional weather to the temper of one leader. Leaders matter, deeply, but the country we create between elections, between headlines, between crises, matters more. It is made of the thousand courtesies that never trend, the volunteer hours that do not photograph well, the careful reading of the other side, the benefit of the doubt granted not because naivety is noble, but because suspicion is expensive and often wrong. So when news feels like the drumbeat of approaching horses, when rumors feel like drafts under a door, we can choose the habits that outlast panic, curiosity over certainty, processes over personalities, rights and limits braided together so that power can move, but only with grace. We do not wait for a meadow and a charter. We write ours in how we shop, how we share, how we speak, how we vote, how we fall quiet when quiet is the wisest sound. Tonight, let that recognition be gentle, not scolding. You have already done more good than the day allowed you to notice. The world is still here. So are you. And the future, patient as ever, keeps offering chances to add steadiness where fear would like to add speed. Breathe again, in and out. Let your shoulders lower. Let your jaw soften. Let your mind feel the ground beneath it, the way a city feels bedrock. Poetic ending. The room grows kind. Now the torches of the past burn low. Only their soft reflections remain, flickering along the walls like quiet fish in a dark river. The halls we walked are empty of voices. The crowns, heavy, glittering, rest on their cushions like instruments no one needs to play tonight. Listen. The echo has become a hush. The hush has become a lull. Outside, mist drifts along the stones. A watchman's staff taps, tap, tap, marking a rhythm even slower than your breath. Somewhere a stable breathes, horses shifting, content. Somewhere a kitchen cools, ash settling, bread dozing under cloth. Somewhere a chapel's last candle sighs into a thread of smoke that carries prayers into the rafters and leaves the air sweet. The past is doing what it should do at this hour, settling, deepening, becoming memory, and you are here, not then. Here, where the pillow remembers your shape. Here, where the blanket has learned your warmth. Here, where no decree can intrude and no trumpet can hurry the heart. The foolish kings, loud in daylight, dangerous in their hour, are very far away now. Their palaces are museums. Their names are homework. Their troubles are pages turned. They cannot touch you. You are not in their story. You are the reader who closes the book. Let the images that served us fade like embers. If any remain, let them be kind ones. A baker adding a ladle to the pot. A child tracing a small crown in frost and laughing as it melts. A field, fought over once, now green with barley, bending to a breeze. Let them repeat, soothing and slow, like waves that know the shore by heart. Field, breeze, bread, bell. Field, breeze, bread, bell. Set down the last of the day's armor, the worry that tried to warn you, the effort that did not quite finish. the sentence you wished you had said better. Place them on a bench by the door, the way a traveler leaves a cloak, ready for tomorrow, unnecessary for sleep. You may pick them up in the morning, or perhaps you will choose lighter clothing. For now, you need only breath and darkness and the kindness of stopping. Trust the silence to carry what you cannot. Trust the night to be a room spacious enough for rest. Trust your own good work, done and undone, to be sufficient for this hour. History makes promises we often misunderstand. This is its truest promise, that everything changes, including worry, including noise. Even the worst rains ended. Even the loudest rooms quieted. Even the heaviest crowns were set down. So, gently, let your thoughts move like lanterns drifting downstream, each one floating past, each one smaller, each one dimmer, until the river is dark and friendly. If a memory returns, nod to it as to a passerby, and let it continue on its way. If a plan arrives, thank it and place it beside the cloak on the bench. There will be light enough tomorrow for plans. Tonight, there is only the soft, steady dark. You are safe. You are here. You are held by the simple architecture of rest, breath, warmth, gravity, peace. In the deep of the night, the past keeps watch outside like an old city guard, walking slow, humming old songs. Inside, your room is a small kingdom governed perfectly by quiet, by comfort, by sleep that comes when invited with patience rather than chased with fear. The bells are no longer alarms. They are distant, kind measurements of time you do not have to keep. Let the hour slip by without you. Let the world take care of itself for a while. What needs your strength will wait. What needs your gentleness will be met more easily after you have rested. Now the story closes its covers. The candles offer a last flicker, then bow. The crowns sleep where they are set, and you, wiser than any king who tried to hold the night in his hands, do the simplest, bravest thing a human can do. You let go. Good night. Let the dim light settle. Softer. Softer still. The candle's last glow, a thin thread of gold. Then hush. Far away, a bell counts the hour. Slow, kind, unhurried. Outside, a quiet wind moves along old stones and empty courtyards, gentle as a hand smoothing a blanket. Breathe in, easy. Breathe out, easier. In and out, like the sea that knows the shore by heart. Let the night arrange itself around you. Pillow remembering your shape, covers finding their calm. The rooms of the past are already asleep. Torches sink to embers. Banners fold themselves. Crowns rest where they were set, heavy and harmless, like old instruments after the concert. There's nothing more to perform. Not there, not here. Listen for the small things, the faint bell, the low wind, the soft, steady drum of your own heart. Each sound is further away than the one before it, as if the world is walking backward on tiptoe, leaving you with only quiet. Breathe in for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, light as a leaf. 1, 2. Breathe out for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again gentle, never trying, only allowing. Dim light, slow bell, quiet wind. Dim light, slow bell, quiet wind. The words themselves begin to rock, back and forth, like a boat that knows the harbor. If a thought arrives, let it be a lantern floating downstream. Watch it pass. Another comes. It passes too. The river keeps its slow, dark kindness. Now the images repeat, softer each time. A corridor of stone cooling after day. A hearth settling to ash. Bread under cloth. Warm and breathing. A small crown traced in frost and melting into silver drops. Nothing sharp remains. Only round edges, only slow edges. Breathe in and notice the space at the top of the breath, that little balcony of quiet. Breathe out and notice the soft slope where the breath goes away, that little path into ease. Each cycle takes you farther into the kind center of night. If you listen, the bell is only a memory now. If you feel for it, the wind is only a thought on the skin. If you look for the light, it is not gone, only tucked in, like you. Spare a kindness for yourself you might have saved for others. Tell your shoulders, rest now. Tell your jaw, loosen. Tell your eyes, grow heavy, then heavier, then gladly closed. The story has folded its pages. The past keeps watch outside the door, quiet and old and polite. Inside, you belong only to this moment. Breath, warmth, gravity, peace. Let the last words be slow and few. Dim light, slow bell, quiet wind. Dim light, slow bell, quiet wind. Each one farther apart, each one lighter than the last. And now, a blessing, whispered low. May your sleep be light, as a breath of wind through ancient castle walls. May it carry away what does not serve you, and bring back what is simple and good. May you drift as gently as ash in a calm hearth, as petals on a night river, as a bell's echo finding silence. Good night. Softly now. Good night. Gently now. Good night.